David Foster Wallace accomplished more than a lot of us could ever dream as a writer, but did it make him happy? How does it feel on the ground as a professional writer? Do you feel content? And today we are going to hear from Wallace about this at length. And Wallace is a good person to turn to for this because he experienced the peaks and the valleys of a writing career, because by the time he was 25 years old, he had already published a novel and a short story collection that were being reviewed by the New York Times, that were gaining him some fame in the literary community. He was corresponding with guys like Don DeLillo because of these collections. I wish I could get somewhere close to that by the time I'm 45. But that was one of those peaks for Wallace, because a couple years after that, he was in a halfway house, not writing and recovering from drug use and alcoholism. A couple years after that, he was at the peak as the next big writer on the block with his release of Infinite Jest. And a couple years after that, he was in a huge writing block slump with no way forward on how he was going to finish The Pale King. And not too long after that, he had committed suicide. And if you guys don't already know, writeconscious is the headquarters of everything related to David Foster Wallace on YouTube. We break down his essays, his stories, his books, his thoughts on reality, and his biography, and so many other things. So go check out some more videos when you're done with this one. Obviously, subscribe, and I will see you guys in more videos. And what I love about the quote today, everyone, that we're about to read in a second, is it actually reveals more information about the time that Cormac McCarthy and David Foster Wallace met each other, which I wish I could have been a fly on the wall for that. The two people we cover on this channel who honestly are somewhat reclusive, in the sense that McCarthy is a total recluse in terms of giving interviews, and Wallace gave less than you think for the amount of fame that he had. A lot of the time, he would only do written interviews. A lot of the interviews we have from Wallace are he would correspond with the journalists because he didn't want to do it in person. All right, so let's hop into the quote about feeling content as a writer. Quote, half the time, yeah, but then the other half of the time, you're like, how could I ever have stopped thanking the ceiling for being able to do this? I want, and again, narrative overlay, whatever. I was in a restaurant, this was years ago, and overheard two guys talking about how hard their jobs were and how they felt like their creativity was one thing, but then there was this constant pressure. The industry was always changing, and they couldn't rely on their sense of what the person they were making their stuff for was going to think. And they were terrified that they were going to get fired, but also praying they were going to get fired because they just couldn't take this. And I don't do this often, but I eventually, because I figured they were part of the few, the proud. They were upholsters, furniture upholsters. And I swear to God, word for word, the conversation was, I don't know. So I guess I sort of think that there's not anything within a certain kind of broad genius of certain kind of jobs. We were talking about this with the scientists at the Santa Fe Institute. It's substantively different, at least for me, than most other jobs would be. If you are the sort of person who could be grateful in any sort of job, then I wish I were you. And what I love about this quote is that it shines light that most people in America are working a very similar job as a writer, but they have just constrained themselves and told themselves a lie about the money and the finances and if the kids are going to be able to survive and all these other things so that they can work a shadow career. Because if you look at things like in the sciences or even stuff involved in sales or business, it's all performance based. And at some level, it's all creativity based. How well can you perform this, and how well is the audience or your boss going to like this? But dealing with pressure and expectations, in my opinion, is a finite resource. And that's why so many writers or prospective writers that I know never really accomplish their dreams and kind of are existing in limbo for decades at a time because they're at a job that has these high pressure stakes at them. I have a buddy who's in sales right now. He sells John Deere tractors down in Texas, but he has a family and kids and he makes good money, but he's under this constant pressure to continue to perform and hit the numbers that he needs to because he has such a great job and now his lifestyle's fitting it. But I've known him for 7-8 years now, and he is a great writer. He's had some stuff published in college, and what I've noticed from him from the last couple of years, and I know he's listening right now, is that he's lost the edge to compete. He's lost that kind of edge to put himself out there in front of new audiences, and deal with their pressure and their expectations. And one of the things that sucks for Wallace, a guy like Wallace, is that when you look at his novel publishing schedule, they were separated about 10 years apart. And so there was this massive pressure with The Pale King because The Broom of the System was Wallace's fictional undergraduate thesis. So whatever, that no pressure there, and it just got published. Infinite Jest was a comeback book after a slump, but he kind of had disappeared from the industry. No one really knew what Wallace was doing. Like this, This was kind of a dark horse publication, but by the time The Pale King was coming out, he was one of the biggest writers in America at the time. And with the success of Infinite Jest and his essays and a lot of his other stuff and his whole kind of persona, people thought like it has to be better. And so I think he instinctively or self-destructively picked the idea of boredom, like in the IRS, like how do we make, how, he picked such a big challenge that it was almost this massive burden to overcome. Like, how do we make the most boring thing interesting? Anyway, and so I deal with this all the time, and that's why I like publishing daily videos, and that's why I've started on my Instagram page, everyone, to post daily poetry and daily nonfiction write-ups, because I constantly want to be in front of audiences, either receiving critique or just having eyes read it and having different energy signatures reacting to it. Because a week ago I made a video about a big YouTuber talking kind of crap about how he analyzes books, and I got a couple emails that were kind of veiled death threats, like I hope you die in a pit. But then the last couple days I've been publishing more traditional videos, and people in the comments are like, this is my favorite YouTube channel. And so I'm constantly kind of booing, I guess I should say, swinging back and forth between these pressures and these expectations, and it makes me better. And it helps me understand my audience more and what people want and need. And if you are a young writer out there, if you are someone who wants to be a writer, that's what I would say it should be your number one priority, is trying to put out a lot of your short work, a lot of your poems, anything you can for free, and starting to build an honest, genuine, but likable audience that's into your stuff. Because the great thing about reading is that we can never really exist in an echo chamber. There are people who are big fans of the show, have liked my stuff for over a year, who I've personally talked to before, and sometimes under a video comment, they're like, you're being an idiot, Ian. Like, you have no idea what you're talking about. And that's cool. And that's even better because I trust them. And I take it really seriously. It's not some random internet troll with like a weird avatar and their name is like user 899995. And what's interesting about this concept, which connects back to the quote, is that David Foster Wallace went to the Santa Fe Institute. And while he was there, he met Cormac McCarthy. And I talk about Cormac McCarthy on this channel all the time. But Cormac McCarthy moved to the Santa Fe Institute in 1997 to be around scientists. And because there was no office space there for him, he ended up writing with his typewriter in the library. And if you guys don't know what the Santa Fe Institute is, it's an independent scientific research institute that is, based on the principles of meritocracy and kind of has a very libertarian bent to it. That they wanted to escape the kind of political correctness and control of universities in terms of scientific research, something that, we've kind of seen all the biases and all the crazy stuff coming out of the university's scientific think tanks the last couple of years. Anyway, and I will also say really fast, the Santa Fe, when you don't take money from take money from universities or the government, you have to take money from independent donors. And one of those donors that gave $275,000 to the Santa Fe Institute was no other than Jeffrey Epstein. I have a whole video on Cormac McCarthy's connection to Jeffrey Epstein. I will try to remember to put that link down below. Anyway, so Cormac goes to the Santa Fe Institute, but he wasn't some reclusive guy there also. He apparently was very social, would talk to everyone who was there. There are stories of interns coming to the Santa Fe Institute for 2 weeks, and Cormac sees a new face, and he starts talking to him and says, what are you here for? And they're like, well, I'm 19 years old, and I'm just like the mail boy. And he was like, well, what are you researching? And he'll sit and talk to a random 19-year-old for 30 minutes about what they're interested in. And so when Wallace showed up, I'm sure it was the same exact thing. They, every day at lunch, had all these daily conversations with all these great minds. They were Nobel Prize winners in science at the Santa Fe Institute. But what this did for Cormac was that it put him around smart people who kept the expectations high, but also kind of moved him into a low pressure environment where he could be constantly throwing out ideas, which we now see were in his last two novels. His last two novels, The Passenger and Stella Maris, whatever you think of them, were very scientific, and he was throwing around ideas. And I'm sure a lot of those were formed and kind of sharpened by a lot of his colleagues. And so you need someone. You don't want to be separate. You don't want to be existing in this independent state, because that's what Cormac was kind of doing. But he, I think, rightly realized that he needed to get closer to people to be able to stay sane as a famous author, because Wallace was kind of floating out in oblivion, literally and figuratively, in terms of his writing career, especially by the end. He had his wife, he was living out in California, but none of his friends were out there. And so this surmounting pressure, then eventually him getting off of his depression medication, all kind of came to a head. And I think if he had a better support system and these types of things, The Pale King and maybe his transition off of drugs wouldn't have been as bad. And so the protocols and solutions for you guys out there, how you guys can use this to enhance your writing career, is that you have to get in front of an audience. You have to start a Substack. You have to start something right now, and you have to try to funnel people in, even if you're being annoying about it. Just posting links, doing whatever. Get people to critique your work. Get over that hump, and eventually you can start to build a better community, because the trolls eventually you have to stop listening. Eventually, once you get big enough, you want to take real critique from real people, but you don't need to get the constant barrage of people. You have to know that the trusted people around you aren't going to just be an echo chamber, and that they're going to tell you what's wrong. Like, I send my short stories to my sister sometime, or my poems, and she's like, dude, what the hell was this, Ian? Like, this absolutely sucks. Like, throw this out. And that's good to know that she'll do that. She's not some person who's just like, yeah, man, that was so good. I've thrown out plenty of things that in retrospect, I was like, man, I don't want to, this is too good. But 7 years later now, I'm like, man, that absolutely sucked. And I would recommend not using a pen name. Like, everyone's always like, should I use a pen name? And what I would tell you right now, no one cares. No one cares about you. You think your family, your friends, all these random people, they might be interested. They might be slightly interested for a while, but they're not going to care. I teach 200 kids a year in a public school, and I have this YouTube channel where sometimes I say crazy things. You guys hear me all the time. Sometimes I'm going off on these tangents. And this year I'm at a new school, and I was so worried about like what would happen when they all figured out I had a YouTube channel, because I told my boss and stuff when I was getting hired, just, to make sure. I was like, check this out. This is what I do. And and eventually someone looked me up, and somehow some kid found my channel, and it kind of exploded, and everyone was talking about it. They all found these crazy clips of me saying like things, and would take them out of context and put them in little TikTok clips, and like they spread around the whole school, and people would say, I heard you say this crazy thing. Like, why were you talking about that? And that was like almost the worst possible reality, where I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to live this down. Now nobody talks about it. And now it's just, hey, Mr. Kadnack, he does YouTube. That's cool. Like, it's turned totally into that. Same with my family. My family knows about all this. Like, my extended family that are very religious. Same thing. For a while, like they made, like, the first time they figured it out, they made some comments like, why are you doing that? And there was this pressure, and I'd feel this pressure like every single time I post. Same with, for a while when all my kids figured out, like that week, I was like, everyone's going to see the next thing I say. Like, what am I going to do? And so I was like, and what I did, I was like, I'm just going to make another crazy video. I'm going to do something totally out of the ordinary then. And eventually now my family doesn't care at all. Now they ask me how it's going, even though they know I am like pretty anti-religious on here and say all these crazy things that they disagree with. They are generally supportive because they don't care. People only have so much care. And if you don't give them energy back and like react or do these things, and the same thing goes on the internet, and why you shouldn't use a pen name. You should put yourself out there. You're not going to get fired, even if you say something crazy, even if you have the crazy story about the weirdest thing, like erotic thing or like whatever. If your job fires you because of that, then you're at a terrible company, and there's someone else in your field that will take you, because we're all just humans, and everyone at every different company is different. And anyway, you guys all understand this, that it's sad, but most humans don't care about you, don't really care about themselves, and will forget about you if you just don't make it a big deal. And so I would recommend publishing with your real name and just building a slow buildup of people that you trust to be around you in a slow audience. And I'm going to get into this soon. One of the things on this channel that I'm going to be really diving into is how to build an audience, how to build an authentic group of people, because YouTube and the whole writing world is kind of shifting to just being yourself. And that's what I'm trying to do on this channel. So I don't do video essays or any of these things. And just by talking like this, I've got hundreds of members over on my Substack now. And I'm sure that will continue to increase, because people understand that if this is what I'm doing here, that's what I'm doing over there, and they can trust me, and I'm just going to be authentic and just doing my typical thing. It's not these flashy marketing things and the subscribe button in the bottom right corner and this and that anymore. It's really just, we're kind of going back to what was happening in like the 2010s on YouTube, where it was just like a lot of talking head videos and just doing these chill things, because people are kind of sick of the Mr. Beast and like all that type of video editing. Alex Hormozy, all those people and what they've done to YouTube. We want to break from it. So now is a golden opportunity to actually be yourself. And the same thing is in the writing world. Because of all the diversity, equity, inclusion, and all the wokeness in the writing world, people want people who are just being themselves and authentically saying crazy things, writing crazy stories, and standing behind them. No one wants to stand behind someone with a pen name. We want to stand behind someone who's an actual human being. And so I'm here to support you on that journey, and I wish you the best of luck, and I will see you guys in the next video.